third ever session of Women in News in the India chapter. I'm Ritu Kapur. I'm the co-founder and managing editor at Quintillion Media Limited. You might be familiar with our website, the Quint and Hindi Quint. And I'm going to dive straight away at introducing our panelists so that we have as much time as possible for the discussion, which couldn't be more important than now in post-pandemic newsrooms. We have on the panel Barkha Dutt, who is, as we all know, is the founder editor of Mojo Story, and we know that through the pandemic she's been traversing across India, bringing us some of the most difficult stories from across. She comes with 23 years of journalism behind her, has been a frontline correspondent who's reported on war and conflict. And we know that she was the host for NDTV's We the People, Buck Stops Here, Democracy Live, winner of many awards, including the, she's India's only Emmy-nominated reporter for her work from Srinagar. So delighted to have you here, Barkha. Also with us is Yagna, who's the founder editor of DT Next, the English daily from Tamil Nadu's Daily Thanti group, and the website dtnext.in. She also comes with 2 decades of journalism and was instrumental in the launch of the Deccan Chronicle newspaper in Tamil Nadu in 2005. And she has a very, very dynamic product with DT Next, and she's talking to a lot of young audiences and has built a strong, loyal readership there. And also with us is Rohini Mohan, with 16 years of journalism behind her. You have to go out and get copies of her Seasons of Trouble, which is a account of 3 people caught up in the aftermath of the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka. Her next book is Mission Cycle, which is a children's book set in Kashmir. I haven't had a chance to look at that, but very exciting. She's won the Chameli Devi Award for Outstanding Women Journalist in 2019. So diving straight in, I think that the topic of this discussion should not really be how did we manage it, but really how should we be managing it? I mean, data staring at us, right? Pandemic has hurt women in the workspace the most. It's of course hurt, people with their jobs across, but we know that women have been hurt the most, and newsrooms, I'm sure, are no different. So, the question that I thought we really should be addressing is, what needs to be done in newsrooms to make sure that newsrooms are as comfortable and as dynamic a space for women journalists as can be. And that again brings that old debate back, which is, should newsrooms be more accommodating and more flexible towards women journalists or women professionals? Or should it be the same thing? Are we feeding into the gender discrimination by doing the derogatory term now for it is almost the reservation approach? Or do we need to recognize that societal norms clearly make things far more challenging for women journalists, whether it is in the work from home situation where women are being hit with much more of the workload at home compared to the men at work. Men at home and at work. Also, does it make it much more difficult for women in the workspace currently? So that's really the big overarching question that I have. Barkha, do you want to take that?
Thanks, Ritu, and great to see all of you. Personally, I would advocate for a flexible approach by workspaces to both men and women. So I'm absolutely comfortable with the idea of work not being bureaucratic, as long as the job gets done, because let's also remember that we are in a space where deadlines are sacred. Oftentimes the deadlines of journalism are not flexible, so you have to work backwards also from the nature of the profession. So there are certain professions where flexibility becomes a much more complicated thing. Medicine, for example, in a pandemic would certainly be one of them. Journalism, while not being as lofty and not being as worthy and not obviously being as important, is for a reason and is listed as an exempt essential service even during the national lockdown. So I personally, I think, come from a generation of feminists who definitely is disturbed to see the declining female labor force participation, which translated loosely simply means that fewer women in India are working today than used to. I, for one, am in favor of workspaces not being wedded to old rules of working hours or working days. For me, it's much more like, this is your assignment. If you get it done, if you're the kind of person who can do it in 2 hours, I really don't think I need you to do an 8-hour day. If you finished, if by any chance you file your story for the day, I don't really care if you're not available for the rest of the day. For me, I'm more concerned with the bottom line. Um, and I also think we do a disservice to women in the long run by gendering the workspace. But I know that younger women, and I've clashed and disagreed often with, I think there's a generational shift happening here. A lot of women do want a gendered workspace environment. And so I think there are no easy answers to this except to say that we will never resolve the equality at work question till we resolve the equality at home question. The reason that women struggle in the workspace to juggle, the reason that women have struggled in work from home is because they are, in the end, laden with much more gendered roles at home. And therefore, I think the more we gender roles, the more this trap actually in the long run will increase for women. So I think that a starting point may be to extend our equality at work conversations to equality at home conversations. For workspaces, yes, to be more compassionate, but to be more compassionate to both men and women. So, for example, maybe there's a stay-at-home dad, or maybe there is a enlightened young man who is willing to take on 50% of his responsibilities at home. Are we going to say that his workspace should not be flexible to him? I think we should encourage that kind of feminist thinking in men.
Yeah, so the question, and Yagna, I'll come to you as people who are managing newsrooms. How much of this addressing the home situation, how much of that is something that we, as people who are running newsrooms, how much of it can we take that up? I mean, I've been in a back and forth conversation with one of my colleagues who has been hit terribly, lives in Bombay houses are small, lives with in-laws. The expectation has been that she has to do everything because obviously the son will not, the son doesn't do housework. The help is no longer being allowed into the house because, there are aging parents in the house. So, therefore a lot of work which typically she would, be able to lean on a house help for, she can't do that anymore. Also, the mental space to be able to be creative or to be able to do her research or her investigation is suddenly compromised because, she said the kind of space that I would get if I could get out of the house and away from the baby and just be in a workspace, that's been taken away from me. Now, my argument with her also has been that, you're financially independent. You have the privilege to be educated. You have the privilege to be able to voice your demands, your needs. Why aren't you engaging in that conversation at home? And her answer really is, it's not that easy. So, the question is, as people managing newsrooms, where does one draw the line here, or how much of an intervention can we be doing? Or can we just be providing the support in terms of the flexibility and the understanding and the sensitivity?
So, Ritu, this is something we discussed before. So I just want to, I had made this point earlier also, because if you remember, we had an earlier conversation where I was facing a similar situation with one of my colleagues. And I asked her, is there some way you can get a little more help? And she just looked at me and she said, I don't need help, I need a wife. Because, what was telling about that statement is the way women can take care of their houses. It can't be substituted. And that is something that has come into focus. So Can we get into their households? I'm not sure, but can they be substituted? That's another thing that is something we can discuss. The other point is, as someone managing a newsroom, I am worried. It took me a long time to bring in women in equal roles, give them the opportunity. And right now, if I have a one-on-one conversation, they're thinking about whether they even need to come back. They're asking me, is there some way I can continue to work without having to come back to the office? And when I did ask, I said, is there something I can do to make it easier? They're like, no, I cannot bring my whole household. If I said, do you need a creche? Do you need someone to help? They said, no, I can't bring my house into the workspace. So, this conversation seems to be going round and round, and I mean, this discussion has come at a very good time. There's just one more observation I wanted to bring up, because traditionally we've always said health, lifestyle, these are the softer beats that gives women a little more flexibility. I know, I can see you saying, shaking your head, but this whole thing has turned on its head right now. Health, mental health, all these so-called soft topics have become very, very hard, and women have had to sort of, they covered it, and they're living through their stories. So these are a few points I wanted to make.
Right. But I think we are all, the four of us are also a bubble, right? We're all in a very privileged, we're all running very privileged liberal newsrooms. Rohini, where do you think, since you have the advantage of not being locked into a newsroom, where do you think we are really at in India on as far as gender diversity in newsrooms is really concerned? Is it really that you have certain percentage of women journalists in the mix in the newsroom? Because there is this whole issue of diversity within the gender itself, right? In terms of regional diversity among women in the newsroom, economic diversity, religion, caste, and how overt does the effort need to be, or does it just have to organically, the representation will happen over time, or does there have to be, and this becomes even that much more important now in the context of the pandemic, in the context of the economic situation, and in the context of what's going on largely in terms of the polarization in the country, in terms of the other kind of diversity that needs to come in among, in terms of representation of diversity in the gender representation. Rohini?
I think the last question was how we address it. I think I'm glad to see that in the last 10 years, I feel like there has been more growing diversity in, if not newsrooms, definitely in journalism. And more, of course, even when I began journalism, I was shocked how many women there were. Even from journalism school that I went to, my classroom was almost 75% women. And then newspaper newsroom, I found that there were more women. And then in a TV channel, so after that, I think I started to just expect women in positions of power, also in editorial, taking decisions inside production teams, even photographers and camera people were much fewer women. And that I think has been growing in the last 10, 15 years. So I would say that in terms of gender, but of course in terms of caste, in terms of sexuality, we still a lot of people have to hide. And I don't think I know, apart from one or two trans women who are journalists, there aren't anyone that I know. So there is, I think, what you said earlier, I wouldn't say, I don't know why a reservation approach should be at all. I think there should be actually more attempt to get, and we can see the variety of voices I think just as lots of women who, when allowed to fully see and also function as their individual selves without having to say like how we that is not done. You report as fully as individualistic as you are, and bring the world that you grew up in, or bring your back, your perspective, which we all do. But somehow that discussion only happens when it is not a non-male person's perspective, that we think that, oh, we have to bring that in. We think that the normal is supposed to be an upper caste male English speaking or Hindi speaking person's perspective, but that why should that be the normal? That is also a perspective. So I do specific attempts from journalism school levels. There are lots of journalism languages that are not channel. Independent journalists, I can say that much of that now in journalism is being brought by people who are free. But I think it pays to pay for those perspectives, pay for the that
I mean, bits and parts, Rohini, we were able to get a gist of what you were saying. But is it one part of it is making sure that there are representative voices in the newsroom? What else in terms of how we look at what's on your front page or what's on your home page in terms of stories that represent this diversity among women? How many of the images are male? How many of the bylines are male? How many on television? How many of the panelists on those slanging matches in the evenings are women? And what among women? What is the representation? What is a conscious effort that we need to be making in the product? One is in the newsroom, which is bringing the diversity, but there's no point bringing the diversity in the newsroom if the representation is there not there in the way we're covering news. Barkha, we can't hear you.
Yeah, okay. I think there are two things being mixed up here. When Rohini spoke about a kind of affirmative action in representation, I don't have a problem with mindful hiring that is aimed at diversity or diverse newsrooms, and I think that's a good thing, and I think we all fall short, especially in class and caste sort of representation. So the reservation approach that, to not be apologetic about it in terms of diverse newsrooms, I think there I agree with Rohini. I think where I don't agree with Rohini, or actually I don't know what Rohini thinks about it because she hasn't spoken on it, is that I think there are a lot of women, and undoubtedly this is still within a circle of privilege, but even from smaller towns and places of hardship, who are making choices of privileging work over, let's say, getting married early or having children, or if they're not privileging it over, they're at least doing a 50-50 choice. And I think to treat those women at par with the women who will say to you, like your colleague, that make allowances for me, is not fair to the women and men, right, who are giving their work the 100% that they have for work. I don't have a problem, by the way. I've always been a big skeptic of this work-life balance. I think we invariably carry a bit of our work to our home and a bit of our home to our work. And I think both our homes and our workspaces have to be more accommodating of the fact that this doesn't work in these neat separations. Not the kind of work we do. Not the kind of work where we can get a message in the middle of the night. We need to be out of the door at 6 in the morning. I remember growing up as a daughter of a woman journalist who, when she did not have a nanny to look after us, would simply take my sister and me to the Hindustan Times newsroom. And I have grown up playing as children on the floor of the Hindustan Times newsroom. Today we have creches, and I think creches should be gender neutral and not available only for the female employees of an organization. So where I agree with Rohini is mindful hiring that is aimed at diversity. But I do think there's something to be said for keeping the rest of the workspace transcending gender, so that men too are allowed to challenge the stereotypes that have imprisoned them for so long. To your point, I still think that we have to be very conscious in representation. Even someone like me, who's an avowed feminist, sometimes finds that I have been booked only manels when it's left to my show producers. I do a show every day, and I have to tell my producers, why have you got 7 men? Why have you got 5 men? Surely there must be women who can speak on, I don't know, technology, defense. So that cliche that, if you're doing, should children go back to school, you'll have a panel suddenly with 4 women. And you're doing the India-China relationship, and you'll suddenly have a panel with 5 men. Those are things that subconscious biases, muscle memory of bias is a very strong thing. And we have to be really, really mindful, almost self-conscious, almost committing ourselves to saying we'll do no manels, we will be less hierarchical in our news, in the way that gender stereotypes. I think the point was made about health as a heartbeat, right? And I think health is a heartbeat. But I think equally, there are women who want to go to the front line and cover a war, and they shouldn't be stopped. And even today, it would be difficult for them. So while, Rohini, to your point that you saw women everywhere, there are many women numerically, but I don't think there are very few. I think there are very few women actually leading newsrooms. I still think the number is minuscule.
Do you think in the Yagna, do you think in the post-pandemic world, do you think women moving to leadership roles is going to get even tougher? Or do you think it's in there's some newsrooms, let's say like ours, it's not going to make a difference, but there will be some spaces where that will change, because it's a no-brainer. I've been on a panel where I've debated that, and I've been told that that's a bias to say that if there are more women in the leadership roles, there will be more sensitivity to women. That isn't the case. But I completely agree with Barkha there. But do you think in a post-pandemic world it's going to be tougher?
I personally think it's going to be tougher, simply because, there's been a lot of challenges right now. There's been pay cuts. There've been a lot of added responsibility for women. And I find it's not, I would want everyone to come back. But I'm not sure if a lot of the women I work with are thinking on the same lines. Because for them, they've suddenly realized that they have a lot more responsibility. And right now I'm keeping where we are moving back to work, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But just a sort of, basic, I pick up a phone and I say, how are you guys doing? And there is just a whole lot of other priorities. It's not the same, oh yes, I want to get back to work and do this. There's been a shift, and it worries me. I wish I could tell you, yes, they're going to come back and we're going to rock it, but I'm not sure.
Rohini, what about field reporting? Do you think it's still tougher for women in field reporting, or Barkha? Either of you, since both of you have been out in the field in very, very difficult situations. Is it tougher is it easier being a man in the field still?
I've never known how to answer this question. I think each person, because I've always been warned off, and I've also faced them because of being female, just as an extension of the difficulties as you face in places where you're not expected to be there as a woman. Even as a woman reporter, I face that. Sometimes the surprise element works, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes you learn to manage, and over the years you stop looking at it as a problem at all. You just see it as one of the other things, like, I'll go to a place, there might not be water to drink or a toilet to use. I just take that into, I have to pack for it, basically, in other ways. So in whatever way I can do it. And I suppose, apart from the fact that men can be anywhere they want as a male reporter, maybe they have other difficulties. Maybe they don't get to intimate spaces as much. They don't are not able to build trust as much. I don't place much. I also never tried crime reporting because I can't do that sort of drinking conversation in the evening. But and this is a conversation I've had with many women journalists, and that is something that, so maybe I haven't even approached, looked at certain fields, certain beats at all, because I know that the barriers are too many. So, okay, but I don't think I have lost anything at all. I've roots into other beats. That during the pandemic, I did see that women or men, the health reporting it didn't feel like there was any gender difference there. We all, one thing that I was hoping that would happen after seeing the experience of vulnerability and experience of whatever fear or even connectedness to humanity, others across gender, would help us realize that in the future, even the fear of family being infected, your own fear of being infected, what you can do to others, because if you get infected, you transmit it. I hoped that all of this would actually make newsrooms be more, because we're talking about newsrooms and speaking specifically about that, newsrooms more cognizant of the difficulty on the ground, as like a crisis reporter would, somebody who's going to report on conflict, extend the kind of care, if there is. I know that in many newsrooms there is no care for even them, even those people. But when you think of insurance, when you think of bulletproof jackets, but if you're sending a health reporter, male or female, what can you do for them? Will you pay for all the safety equipment that they have to wear, protective equipment? Will you pay for the travel, the slightly more expensive due to hygiene fears? Will you give them a little more time to do the story? Will you pay more for the risks that they are taking? These are things that field reporters, have been asking in the last 1 year. And things like camera equipment, you have to constantly clean them. It takes much longer to do a story. It takes longer to get permission to walk into an ER or a COVID ward. It does take time. It will take some more influence. Press cards. Why don't you just give press you've already seen, right? Reporting or guidelines you've already seen. And these things, I think, and of course, the freelance is already, in terms of pay, many of us don't know what. So you're kind of negotiating, and just as people used to for your salaries in newsrooms. And I'm one of many people. I think I learned from some of my salary to any person who's around. Because then, and I found that lots of women get paid much less. I, for the same position, was paid less than a man was paid who had just quit. So even inflation was not given in my favor. So this, as freelance journalists also, when we, and field reporters who are freelancers, when we are negotiating all of these things, more transparency is there. What will I get if I'm on the field? If something happens to me, will you pay for my insurance? Will you pay for my treatment? More transparency about what it is like to be on the field. Women will have some specific other challenges, which will also have to be transparently talked about. Then I think it will be fewer people will fear to go on the field. There will still be people who fear, but there will be many more who will not.
The fear factor was very real. This is something that I think was gender agnostic. I found everybody, all the reporters, everyone on the field was equally scared. This was something that I don't think we can put a gender to.
Yeah, and a lot of challenges that we spoke of would cut across gender. But Barkha, on the field, do you think it's tougher? And do you think women journalists, there's a pay gap as for freelance women journalists as well, or facility gaps for freelance? Because if you're part of a newsroom, you also have the heft and financial legal support of the newsroom. But if you're a freelance journalist and you're a woman, is it that much tougher?
So, obviously, public spaces are not designed for women. So, by definition, certain things that men can take for granted, like a loo break, for example, the most common thing that you face a problem when you're in the field is bathrooms are either filthy or non-existent. And it kind of, when I have seen younger female colleagues, the one thing that they're not able to make their peace with is this: I don't have it. I don't know, again, if it's a generational thing or if it was early exposure. so much of life was a fight at that time just to get the assignment that we didn't think of these things, and it was just boot camp version of life. You went behind a tree and you went in a cave and you were used to it. But I do watch younger female colleagues struggle with this in the field, and it makes you notice that your public spaces are just simply not designed for women. They're designed overwhelmingly for men. So of course women have to work in the field twice, thrice, 4 times as hard as men to get to the same place, and then they're scrutinized 10 times as hard. Everybody hates a successful woman. So there's all of that goes with being in the field. Men are indulged in a way that women are simply not. And misogyny is gender neutral. You will often find women being absolutely horrible about other women, and more's the pity, but that does happen. So that's one part of it. But I believe that the future of journalism, especially post-pandemic, is going to be freelance driven. I think the age of the big newsroom is ending, if it hasn't ended. Yes, there might be one or two behemoths, big media, big tech with big pockets, but mostly you are going to see journalism increasingly in a season of budget cuts. It's going to be increasingly dependent on local reporters or freelance contributors. And I think we have to be able to treat freelance contributors, in my opinion. There are certain things that you owe freelance contributors who are with you regularly. So I can't take responsibility for someone who sends me one story from one city once. But let's say there's somebody on my roster as a consultant and contributes, let's say, X number of stories every month, then I think in the pandemic, I would owe them an attempt to get them vaccinated. If there is a hardship allowance that my full-time employees are getting, and if the freelancers have been out in the field as exposed, they should get the same bonus / hardship allowance. The same doctors' interventions, all of the same things. I actually don't see much difference for regular freelance contributors. I think the people who are most vulnerable are one-off freelance contributors, and there I don't think it's gendered. I think I have seen a lot of young men in their early 20s form the backbone of the stringer network of this country, and really they have no protection, they have no privilege, they're just literally on their own. So that particular thing I don't think is gendered.
And I think on the freelance, I know we're segueing away from the gender conversation, but I think the one thing that one worries that could be making freelance journalists the most vulnerable is in these times of sedition cases and digital rules, guidelines, and all kinds of censorship merging into criminality, is legal recourse. It's that really is.
But I think the platform has to take that responsibility, because otherwise it's a failure of editors. And I think to leave your contributors out there to face that is just wrong. I mean, it has to be your vetting process in the end that's responsible. I know it's easier said than done. We've all had, stories, mistakes slip through the cracks. It's in the nature of what we do. But the responsibility will have to be ours. It just cannot be that of the contributor alone, at least.
Coming back to women in newsrooms in post-pandemic world, is just one last question before we take a few of the questions that have come in. Do you think sexual harassment or harassment of women in the workspace is going to become more invisible and therefore tougher for organizations to handle in this, in these Zoom conversations? Sometimes they're late night Zoom calls, sometimes they're unwarranted one-on-one Zooms. Is there a sense that that fight against sexual harassment in the newsroom is going to get more complex than it already was?
Who do you want to answer?
Anyone.
Okay, I'll go first. I do think at some level, because of the new ways in which it can happen, those who are already living their life on digital platforms, I think we know what a range of ways in which you can be attacked online, and from unknown to known people, there's a variety. So there's also needs to be a variety of response. It's very different that, like, in a Zoom conversation, like in a conversation that's online like this, you'd have unknown people walking in and saying something or sending inappropriate photographs. How do you deal with that? It's a different conversation. And while there should be a formalized way of dealing with that, there should also be a formalized way of dealing with the more the known office spaces. How do you first of all prevent certain behavior, which is like you can't have anyone walk in. You have to have a way of appearing on. There have been situations where people just walk in and say, however, it's not formal. Just because it feels informal, it becomes informal where you chat. All of this is very uncomfortable, and it has happened to me as well. It's not just uncomfortable; you're not able to do your job properly. That first of all, and then this is unwarranted. I think the easier I would say, if I have to look for the pluses, it's easier. You have more and more. It seems like any panel or even courts are not believing women at all. After going so much forward in progressing in trusting in the laws, we have regressed in the way we use them, and so. But maybe we'll have proof. We'll have screen.
Is there a way of formally dealing with online abuse and harassment of women? I mean, we've been talking about it, and we have there's tons of evidence. I mean, I know that we have gone to cyber cell, with several cases against several of our colleagues. It just comes to nothing. It comes to, we are trying to find out. It's what do you do? How do you formally address this? How do you formally support and fight this? Is there a way?
I mean, I don't know who wants to take that, but I'll take it. There's actually no good way. I think the system exhausts us because the alternative is to keep going to court on a case-by-case basis, to keep writing multitudes of missives to these platforms, and it just becomes so exhausting that it's almost less exhausting to be abused. And I think that is the pathetic sort of situation that we find ourselves in, where you just basically grow a thicker and thicker hide, and you say, okay, I won't read my mentions, I won't read the comments. And it's terrible. But the fact of the matter is, between how the platforms are set up and how our legal system is set up, I really think that there's no good answer to this. But I did want to make a separate point about sexual harassment. I think one of the things that people are not sensitive about is women have to fight to get assignments. Women don't automatically get all assignments. There are benevolent employers who think they're being very kind and who say, no, I'd rather send a guy to this assignment. There are spaces that are not as open to women because you're essentially covering all male worlds. For example, if you cover politics or military, you're still covering all male or predominantly male spaces dominated by men. And a lot of women do not speak up in real time about sexual harassment because you simply do not want to lose the opportunity to report that story. And you know that the moment you report sexual harassment, even within your organization will take the protectionist approach and say, all right, I won't send you to this story. Whereas the answer you're looking for is, I want that harasser to be, told to buzz off, and not that I lose my right to cover that story. But unfortunately, the real world doesn't work like that, right? So women who spend their lifetimes dealing at their own level till they can with men who harass them, almost as a prerequisite of the work environment, of the larger work environment. I don't mean office spaces, but I mean the kind of stories you cover, the kind of people you meet. So I think that's the reality of it, that we don't often say out loud enough, that it's such a fight to get the stories you want to cover. You don't want to be punished, double punishment, that first you get harassed, then you lose the story you're desperate to cover.
I'm going to quickly take one or two questions. I don't think we have tons of time. Yagna or Barkha, would either of you take this? The question is, where do Mojo Story, the Quint and TT Next stand on achieving 50-50 gender equality in newsrooms and content coverage? And does that equality score cater to journalists with gender-queer identities? I think we've had a bit of a chat about this, that there's a lot to be done yet, but would either of you like to come in on anything in particular that you're doing in your newsrooms to address this? Or
I'll let Yagna take that because I've been speaking a lot.
No, I just want to say that, I would I would love it if it was. I don't want to put a percentage and say this is the goal. For me, I would hire whoever is most appropriate for the job. I can't even imagine a situation where I say, no, I want a woman for this or a man for this. It's just the right person for the job. And I just would welcome anybody who's fit for that, who suits the role. Should we do this in a more structured way and have put a sort of a quota as such, 50% men, 50% women? I, if that's a better way of achieving it, maybe. But right now, I just need more journalists to come in, to continue writing, to give them the opportunities. I hate. I think age bias is something that I face much more than gender bias. Someone thinks that because they're older and more experienced, they're suitable for the role. That's a bias that I fight almost every day. Age bias, and then
I think what's helped, I feel, at the Quint is that a lot of the team leads are women. Our sports editor is a woman. Our executive editor is a woman. Our opinion editor is a woman. The citizen journalist editor is a woman. So a lot of our sales head is a woman. So it's just I think that. And that's actually happened just because they were so good at their job. It's not like they've been handpicked at that. But I think that helps the narrative going down within the team. I'm going to just take this. Maybe Rohini, you could answer this if it's a question, and I'm just going to paraphrase the question from Niharika Raina. Is on what's it like going to be for getting, you talked about how there were so many women journalists when you were in journalism school and when you joined newsrooms. But now with job cuts and scarcity of work and budget cuts in newsrooms, is it going to be tougher? I want to ask, how will young journalists like me get jobs? That's basically, is there something that they should be doing? Is there something that you should be doing as a freelance journalist, that you build a body of work even as you're waiting for a job? What's your advice here?
Yeah, that's what it is. If it is what you can do, part-time job, if as close to journalism as possible first. If it is editing, it's editing. If it is communication, rewriting press releases, do it because these are desperate times. And if you already don't have a lot of experience, assignments will come only later. So first is financial security. If you still want to stay in journalism, I would say do a part-time job, which at least pays your bills. And at the same time, it just takes a lot of more work. I mean, at the same time, pitching stories, at least one story a month in a time when it is hard, one story a month, small or big. I'm just saying it. And so that you get your bylines, get more bylines, and do only stories that will add to your, because when we there's so little opportunity, and if you're in the early years of your career, like under 3-4 years, it's be hard to do only good stories, right? So you will be doing all sorts of stories that you may not want to do at that time. So that's why I'm saying a part-time job for the money, and some extra stuff that you can be proud of, that you can have, that you can use then to get a job, then to also get new assignments. I often see that people try to earn through the stories, then you start doing a lot of crap, actually. So in those first few years, it's important to also do some really good stories, which then opens the world out. So I think that's.
And then to that would be that when you're sending in a mail for the pitch, please write it out clearly. We get a slew of mails for this. If the notes that you're sending is sort of, nobody wants a story that's telling you everything about everything. So please send in your sharp, specific, well-researched pitches.
And work on building skills, don't expect the job to teach you everything. If you're a young journalist, just work on building your skills. Basic grammar checks, and it sounds so basic, I can't believe I'm saying this, but sometimes just that one little line that's written badly, and you don't want that person to be contributing.
And I'd like to add one more thing on Yagna's skill point. Teach yourself multimedia skills. Please be, The one disappointment I've had in my new avatar in the digital world is a lot of women colleagues don't want to pick up the tech. They say, we're journalists, we want to focus on getting the story, but they don't want to pick up the tech. They don't want to be editors. They don't want to be camera persons. And now today you've got to be everything. They don't want to learn coding. And that's my one bugbear, really. So I think we're really short on time, but if we can just do one quick round with all three of you, Barkha, Yagna, Rohini, in that order, on the one thing that we should be doing as people managing newsrooms to really make it that much better an environment for women journalists.
See, I think there's no hard and fast rules. I kind of believe in a little bit of tough love. I think we have to mentor younger people, but mentoring should not be equivalent always to hand-holding. I don't think I would have got to where I was had I not been put on some very tough assignments and been expected to deliver them at quality and been judged, scolded, reprimanded when I fell short. And I went through that curve. And as a sort of older person, an older woman in particular, mentoring younger women, I consider it almost a public duty to toughen girls up. I do not believe in my way of indulging is that if I can teach you to be tougher, I think I've done something good by you. You may hate me for it in that moment, but you will thank me for it one day. So it is what our parents said to us. I feel like that about my workspace. So does that make me, like, I think in the short term, there'd be people who would be like, yeah, she's a really tough taskmaster. And I think I probably am. But I think that's because that's how I learned. And I believe I learned well. And therefore, I do think that we need to be mentoring. And I think we need to be mentoring girls, women to be self-reliant economically, but also psychologically and emotionally. It's very important. You can't just be corsetting women all the time.
I couldn't agree more with Barkha. Completely. Yagna?
I do agree because, the fact is, I didn't get any of the breaks I did because I was a woman. I did the work. I did everything that I had to do to get to where I am. Having said that, I also think it's very important to have women and a female perspective in the newsroom because men just don't see things in a certain way. Women do bring something that is undeniable. And for that reason, I would want to have as many women in the newsroom as I could possibly have. I do have as many women as men in the newsroom. And I will do what it takes to make sure that, they have that level of comfort. They can come into the office and they don't have to I don't want them to think about gender when they enter the newsroom. If I can do that, then I would run a very decent newsroom.
Right. Rohini, last word with you.
Yeah, I'll say two suggestions. One is hire women, more women, and not just because you think they come at a discount. Make things formal. Contract. Please give people contracts who you're hiring, field reporters, or editors. Have contracts, and all of the things that we are talking about can slowly be built into those contracts.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks
so much for a great conversation. I hope I was able to take as many relevant questions as I could find. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Rohini.
Bye-bye.
Bye.